everyone. Thank you so much again for inviting me to moderate the panel this afternoon. I'm honored to be here and wanted to go ahead and introduce the panelists at this time. The first panelist that will be speaking today is Carmen Lomellin. Carmen was the U.S. ambassador to the OAS, which is the Organization of American States, from 2009 through 2014. In 1998, she was appointed to the position as OAS Executive Secretary of the Inter-American Commission of Women, the CIM, by Secretary General Cesar Gaviria. She served as CIM Executive Secretary until March of 2009. In that position, she provided guidance and direction to the OAS member states and Permanent Secretariat on hemispheric policy, advancing issues affecting women, particularly in the areas of human rights and gender equality. During the Clinton administration, Ambassador Lomellin held the positions of White House liaison for the U.S. Office of Personnel Management and director of that agency's Office of International Affairs. She was an advisor on Hispanic affairs to the White House Office for Women's Initiatives and Outreach. She is a proven leader in Western Hemispheric foreign policy development and implementation. Let's give her a round of applause, and she will speak for a few minutes, and then I'll introduce the next speaker.
Thank you very much. I'm not tech savvy enough to do a PowerPoint, so please bear with me. First of all, Ana, thank you so much for the introduction. I'd like to thank Florida International University, Dr. Mora, and of course the Cuban Human Rights Foundation for hosting this very important event. The work you are truly doing the Lord's work, and I can't tell you how inspired and humbled I am to be here and listening to the really brave women that are day to day confronting the challenges to democracy and the challenges to human rights in their countries. I cannot admire them enough, and again, I feel very humbled to be in their presence. We were given the instructions just to talk a little bit about how we got to the political aspects of our life, what led us there, and then how we saw the role of women in certainly in public, in foreign policy and in political leadership. I can say one thing. Political involvement was probably the last thing on my mind. I grew up in a small steel town outside the city of Chicago. My parents were Mexican immigrants. My first job out of high school was working the midnight shift at the steel mills, typing up invoices, a job that I held for about 7 years. I couldn't go straight to college because, of course, I was a girl. My father was very traditional. I had to work to help support my family, and for a lot of us, this is not unusual. The interesting thing is, when my brother graduated from high school, my father told him, "Hijo, wherever you want to go to college, donde quieras, por favor. I'll work 2 or 3 jobs if I had to." Of course, he didn't want to go to college, which I find interesting. So I put myself through college, going to night school for 14 years, really, to get both of my degrees. And I was on a corporate track. I had gotten an MBA, and I'm thinking, oh yeah, I'm just going to really rise to the ranks, except it wasn't happening. And I knew I had to make some kind of career change. And this is the change that completely turned my life around. I went to work for MALDEF, the Mexican American Legal Defense and Education Fund, where I was the director of leadership training Latinos, Latinas on how to get on boards, how to become more active in their communities. But for me, being in that position, I went into the Latino communities in Chicago, primarily working with women. I saw the young girls, 14, 15-year-olds, pregnant with other little babies. I saw kids that were dropping out of high school because they weren't being challenged. I saw the fact that our people were working 2 and 3 jobs with very little pay and no insurance and no benefits. And I also saw that there were the political leaders of the city of Chicago making the decisions for my community without any input from my community. So I started working with some of the community organizers and the activists on issues of importance. First and foremost, the importance of voting, the importance of citizenship and voting. I clearly remember one specific case where I was talking to this elderly Mexican lady trying to see if she would get out and vote. And I said, señora, ya está inscrita para las votaciones. No, mija, no puedo, no soy ciudadana. And I said, bueno, ¿dónde nació? Nací en Texas.
I was born in Texas.
You know, that's frightening. All her life, she had never participated in the electoral life of this country because she didn't think she was a citizen. So I decided to become very active in politics. Chicago politics is very unique. So it was an interesting experience, and I learned a lot of I just learned a lot. And I think one suggestion I would make to the young people, whatever your political affiliation is, get involved in politics. It is one of the best training grounds. You learn organizing skills, you learn public relations skills, you learn issues development, and you develop a network that will eventually get you where you are, which is how I got into the further political track. I was involved locally in a lot of political races, but then I became one of the first people involved in the early Clinton campaign, the first one. And I met Hillary Clinton and traveled with her during the first campaign. And I very soon became in the community, the Latina that a lot of people came to for advice. I didn't really know much of anything, but I never let them know. So when President Clinton was elected, I was asked to come out to Washington to serve in his administration and was appointed to work in the White House Women's Office. We developed a very interesting initiative while there. It was called At the Tables, and that was an initiative where people went out into the community, appointees, when they traveled, and met with women leaders, not political leaders, community leaders, to get a sense of what people were thinking, what people were saying, what were the definite needs in the community. And that was such a way to really get the pulse of what was going on. After the Clinton administration, and I'm really trying to rush this so everybody gets a chance to talk. After the Clinton administration, I was offered the position of head of the Inter-American Commission of Women for the Organization of American States, an amazing organization with a very long and proud history. And one of the big surprises for me was that the issues that I was dealing with at the commission were the very same issues I was dealing with in the Latino communities in Chicago: gender discrimination, inequity in pay, lack of access to information, lack of access to justice, human rights violations, civil rights violations, on a much more expanded level and a much broader level, but they were the same. And we spent a lot of time working particularly on gender-based violence. It is rampant in the region. It is rampant throughout the world. Still, after all this discussion, after all these conventions, after all these promises on the parts of governments, we still have very serious problems. I was speaking just last week in New York with the head of an organization called Equality Now, and it's a global women's human rights organization. And she was telling me she was talking about the issues with some of the Middle Eastern countries, and she told me that what they're seeing here in the United States is a sharp increase in the cases of female genital mutilation in the United States. And that is probably one of the most extreme forms of violence that can be perpetrated on any young woman. So the challenges still remain. I certainly am speaking to the choir. You are all very well versed on a lot of the actions that are being taken, a lot of the work that's being done in this particular area. But I think one of the encouraging things is that we are seeing the women stepping up to the plate, women demonstrating their leadership and taking on the very, very difficult issues in their country. There's been a lot more participation at the political level. Obviously, right now, there are fights 5 women heads of state: Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Jamaica, and Trinidad and Tobago. But we're also seeing an increase in political involvement at the local levels. For example, 25% of elected officials in parliaments and legislatures are women. 25% in city councils, 24% in the high courts, and 11.7% at the mayoral level. So we're getting there. It's a lot of work, and there are a lot of challenges still remaining. I think you can make the case that perhaps the quota laws in a lot of countries are having a positive impact. Research shows that 30% participation of women is the critical mass to really create change and impact legislation and build coalitions to move legislation forward. So there are 12 countries in the region that have electoral quotas for women. 30% is pretty much the average. Costa Rica, on the other hand, has the highest quota, 40%, which I think is admirable. And I think the reason women do get involved when they get involved are very personal reasons. They see there's something wrong in their community. There is something wrong in their city or in their state. The schools are bad. They want better schools for their children, access to jobs, all the social issues that really propel a woman into a political life. And I think, especially my colleagues that have worked on these issues for all these years, is that women have a different way to approach certain issues. I was in Nicaragua a few years back. We were doing a project on basically gender-based budgeting. Small town in Nicaragua. And what they did, the process was very interesting. They took the men and the women and they trained them and taught them what a budget is, how it works, what it means for a local community. Then they separated the men and the women to get their feedback. They asked the men, if you could have a say-so in how the budget spent, what would you do? What would you want? The men responded. They wanted soccer fields. They wanted more recreation. They wanted lights for their soccer fields. The women wanted better schools. They wanted paved roads so their feet wouldn't get cut up when they went to the mills to grind their corn. They wanted hot houses, viveros you call them, I think. Greenhouses so they could grow flowers, sell them, make money, and help support their families. Big difference. Big difference. I think in looking at where we are politically and in political leadership with women in the region, there's challenges and bright spots. Recently, an article by Jolynn Shoemaker of CSIS, she highlighted some of the recent challenges rather. Having, and this is an important point, sometimes we grumble about it, but it's true, having some key female figures in highly visible, powerful roles hasn't really solved the female underrepresentation problem. I think it's fair to say that women in positions of leadership don't necessarily have a gender perspective. We hope they do, we expect that they do, but they sometimes don't. Women, personal challenges, women still have the primary responsibility for the home. I'm always amused when they ask a woman politician, well, how are you going to balance, your job and raising a family? I have yet to hear anybody ask that of a man. They just don't. The work-life concerns exist, inflexible schedules, really oftentimes unrelenting travel, constant pressure to be in the office and busy and working are pretty common features of some of these positions and the jobs that will get you to the positions certainly in the foreign policy world. And there is burnout.
y la
A lot
gente
of
se
these
quema.
jobs are
Muchos
very
de estos trabajos
demanding.
son
You
muy
work
exigentes,
very
se
long
trabajan
hours with very
muchas
little
horas con muy
recognition.
poco
And
reconocimiento.
one other key
Y
point
uno
is
de
the
los
lack of
puntos claves es la
sponsorship or
falta de
mentorship.
patrocinio o de un mentor o
Women,
tutor que te ayude.
they do recognize
Las
the
mujeres
need
reconocen la
for advocates,
necesidad de tener
for
a una
mentors
persona
that'll
que le
open the
apoye,
door, but it
mentores que le
also
abran las
doesn't
puertas,
often
pero
happen.
no pasa con
But the
frecuencia.
male colleagues
A los
always seem
hombres
to have
sí, siempre tienen
somebody
alguna,
that's
alguien
shepherding
que
them
les
through, that's
ayuda, los
providing them,
pasa, les
after
ofrece la
work
oportunidad, les
guidance or
guía,
guidance on
les da
the
guía
golf
como
course on, you
incluso
should
en el
meet this
campo, en la
person, or let
cancha
me
de golf,
introduce you,
déjeme
or you might
que
want
le
to take this
presente a esta
direction. I think
persona,
that's
haga
where
esto, un
we have a
consejo.
lot more work to
Por eso
do.
que en ese aspecto tenemos
Some
que
of the
trabajar
bright
muy
spots, I
arduamente.
think,
Algunos de los puntos
that we can be
brillantes de esto,
glad
lo bueno
for,
cuando
and I've got a
me
couple
puedo
minutes left,
contentar y me
is the
quedan dos par de
collective
minutos,
influence of
es
women
la
leaders.
influencia
For
colectiva de las
example,
mujeres
at a
líderes.
recent UN
En
meeting,
una reunión de las
there was the
Naciones
call
Unidas
to
recientes
action on
había un
gender
llamado de
equality on
acción
the
en
20th
la
anniversary of
igualdad
Beijing,
de género
really
del
where the
aniversario de
women heads of
Beijing.
state got
Las
together to
mujeres tienen que
demand
estar
action of the
juntas para
governments.
pedir acción al
Other
gobierno.
examples,
Otro ejemplo,
in the year
en
2000,
el
the
año 2000,
Declaration of
la
Mexico on
Declaración de
Security in
México
the Americas
de
that
la
for the first
seguridad por
time
primera
looked
vez
at the
se
social
vio al
aspects and the
aspecto
impact
social
of
en el
women
impacto de la mujer
facing serious security
que ven
challenges in the
problemas de
region.
seguridad graves de la
And
región.
also
Y
the
también
Inter-American Democratic
el
Charter. There is
charter
a clause
interamericano,
that talks
la
about
Carta
participation
Magna
of women in
habla de la
democracies.
participación en la democracia.
That
Eso,
particular piece was put in by a
eso se
former
redactó
Salvadoran
por
ambassador
un
to the
embajador de
OAS,
Salvador,
Margarita Escobar,
Margarita
a terrific
Escobar,
woman.
una mujer maravillosa.
They were
Margarita
done
Escobar.
with the
Ya
negotiations,
habían
and
concluido la
she made them
negociación y
reopen
ella
that
abrió
document to make
nuevamente
sure
el
that
documento a
that
asegurarse
there was
de que
some kind of statement on women.
dijese algo sobre
I
la
think
mujer.
if
Creo
listening
que
to
si se le
the
escucha a
presentations, I
todas
think
las
it's very clear that
presentaciones,
we need to
parece que es muy
teach our
claro que
young
tenemos
women.
que
And
enseñar a
I
nuestras
think it was one of the
jóvenes.
speakers
Creo
that
que
talked
una de las
about
presentadoras habló
from
acerca
Cuba that
de
talked about
Cuba,
how
que
she
habló de
talks to her
cómo ella le habla a
children
sus
about
hijos
what she's doing
acerca
and
de
why
lo que ella
she's
está
doing.
haciendo y por
We
qué lo
need to
está
do that
haciendo.
more
Tenemos que
with our
hacerlo.
young women.
Tenemos que hacerlo con nuestras niñas.
I think we need to
Nuestras jóvenes.
get
Tenemos
them
que
away from Barbie dolls and beauty
que
pageants
ya no
and
hablen
focus
tanto
a
de
little bit more
concursos de belleza y
on
de
the
muñecas
realities of
Barbie, que
life
se
and
concentren
their
más
role in
en la realidad y su
impacting
papel
society.
en el
With
impacto que
that, I'll
puede tener en la
stop, and
sociedad. Y
I
con
look
eso
forward
me
to your
detengo y
questions.
espero que me hagan preguntas.